Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here.
Hello,
Yes. How are you feeling today, Kevin?
I'm feeling well. Mary, how are you?
I'm great. I'm great. It's always a wonderful time with you. So I'm looking forward to this discussion about executive functioning and student success. All right, so we've got one attendee. So I guess as more come in, we'll get started maybe in a minute or two. Okay.
There's not a lot of information, but we want to give time for discussion. That's what I'm big on. So people who are
Yes.
attending, please think of any questions that you have, put them in the chat
Yes.
or just write them down, and we will devote a lot of time to Q&A.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so we have Jerry and Heather here. Lovely to have you too. We look forward to the discussion. Okay. Yeah, let me know when you feel like you want to start, or if you want to wait a little bit more.
I feel ready to jump in.
Yeah, me too.
Is everybody else ready? I'm doing the presenting, so I can't see any.
Yeah.
Anyone.
No, that's a good point. So if anyone makes, any comment or what have you, I will definitely read it out. So feel free to interact, put questions in the Q&A, any thoughts you might have, and we'll make sure to address all questions and ideas. Okay. All righty.
Welcome again. And I'll just kick us off, and then Mary's going to take us out, and she's going to pretty much lead us through our discussion. And we're here to talk today about executive functioning and how that translates to student success. So whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a coach, whether you're a pastor, we all actually contribute and do this in different ways. And all I'd like to make sure that everybody walks away with is the understanding that there are no soft skills. I tend to minimize what we think of as soft, or what we don't think of as this is exactly what I was being taught in school, when it's still being reinforced and what is necessary to be successful.
Well said. Okay, so what is executive functioning? Executive function refers to a collection of cognitive processes that allow one to achieve goal-oriented actions or to execute. So because these processes mostly involve the frontal lobe of our cerebral cortex, known as the executive center, these processes are referred to as executive functioning skills. So this is, of course, based off of that, the region of our brain. It's also based off of the fact that, when you are trying to complete a goal-oriented task, there's a lot of planning and a lot of skills that we're going to be discussing that contribute to the fulfillment of those goals. And so when I think of an executive, like in a company, right, they're multiple people that help the executive fulfill a certain task within a company. And so if we think of our lives as, I guess you could say, like mini companies, so like a mini company, we would need to have certain tasks or certain tasks or skills needed for us to complete that goal-oriented action. So I think executive functioning is a great way to kind of encapsulate the goal-oriented action and the tools and the processes needed for that to happen. Yeah.
Emphasis on the goal.
Yes.
Emphasis on the goal. Without a goal, it's kind of directionless. And there's nothing more scary than a directionless child or a directionless mind. That's so we always say, I start with goal setting. That's number one.
Definitely. All right. So as you can see, there are a plethora of executive functioning skills. So planning, goal setting, which we had emphasized, is also very important. So when we think of planning, we're thinking of the process or the methodology that allows one to create a roadmap or a guide to reach a goal or complete a task. That's also a time-saving strategy, of course, if we're, like Kevin mentioned, if we're aimlessly trying to reach a goal that sounds like a recipe for disaster, or possibly, taking a lot more time than necessary to complete a task, right? We want to be as efficient as possible. So planning allows for that to be a little bit more concrete. And then with organization, so organization is in the bottom left there. So that's where it allows us to design and to maintain a system to keep track of your materials or the information needed to complete this. So I see this a lot when it comes to projects. I think it's also really great to see how teachers, especially with those huge projects that take weeks, sometimes even a month or two to complete, that there's like a very clear, not only just a plan, but a way in which each like subtask can be executed, and it's organized and it's very clear to the student how it can be executed. And then we have metacognition. So that is in the blue. So that allows for one to stand back and look at your own thought processes objectively, or your perspective, being able to look at that objectively. So meta is like overarching, right? So being able to, it's essentially like almost like thinking about thinking, right? So when you're able to look at the way that you process information and see what ways that can be refined, and that can also help to achieve long-term goals. And of course, empathy. So we have empathy here in the bottom left again. And so that is the process or methodology by which one can understand others' perspectives in an effort to sense and relate to their feelings, and with the will to respond appropriately. And that allows one to work towards a common objective collaboratively, so with others. It's interesting because I think maybe some people wouldn't think of empathy as a process or a methodology. Usually they'll think of, oh, empathy is just, being able to walk through someone's shoes, but it's extremely useful in being able to complete a task, especially on tasks that are collaborative, right? And that comes up a lot in school with those group projects and whatnot. That requires a little bit of not just thinking in your own head and considering how you feel, but how other people feel, both maybe with the content at hand that you're addressing, or even just with the act of collaboration. So it's layered and multifaceted. And then we have concentration, sustained attention. Might be one that we struggle with our students in the age of social media and everything. But if we were to define that, that would be the process or methodology by which one attends consistently to a scene or task despite distraction, fatigue, or boredom. So yeah, it's an interesting time we live in, right? With concentration, but it is still a skill that can be refined and honed it over time, as we think about all of the tools at our disposal to help a student complete a task successfully. And then efficiency, also known as time management. So this allows us to estimate how much time one has and best allocate it in order to meet deadlines. That one is also one that definitely requires a little bit of perspective on time and have a pretty good grasp on time. And if not, that's okay. There are always methods to help us to have a better sense of time. And I know with teenagers, that can also be an interesting time. Like, oh, you thought that project would take you how long? And usually I find it's underestimating the time tends to be the more common thing in my experience. So that, again, that's something that we can have a better handle on to better execute our long-term goals. And then there's goal setting, almost self-explanatory. So it's a process or methodology by which one identifies a desired outcome and generates criteria to evaluate its success or failure. Then we've got self-inhibition, also self-explanatory. So you think about your plans, you think and plan your actions before actually acting on them. So essentially think before you act. And then attached to that, self-regulation. So you manage your emotions in order to achieve a goals or complete a task or direct behavior. So as you can see, they're both very similar to each other. And then decision making. So where you think of or you begin and commit to a task or outcome, adhering to that timeline. And then adaptability. So being able to revise a plan in the face of various setbacks, new data, or errors. And it's, I think, some of the best plans that you can think of when we go back to the planning executive functioning skill is being able to create a plan such that if a setback were to come up, that it doesn't completely derail your path toward that goal, right? And that's something that can also be fostered and developed. And then persistence. Persistence is a very good one. So it's the ability for one to follow through and complete a task despite setbacks or competing interests. So in order for us to be persistent, we need to be pretty adaptable. So you can see how they work together there. Kevin, any thoughts on these?
There are a lot of different terms that are describing the same thing. And I always, so even though we can break up these skills, we usually do that to teach them, but not necessarily when you have to remember that they all combine together to just, again, accomplish a goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Don't get hung up on some terminology. I would say just find a common one between you and whoever you're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Can move on to the next one. Awesome. So what is responsible for limited executive functioning skills in some students? I think this is it's an important question to address because I think, as parents, as mentors, academic mentors, and as teachers, we have witnessed and we witness all the time students showing instances where they don't have those executive functioning skills developed as much as we would hope or that we would desire. And so this gives a little bit of insight to that. And I'm sure there are more. And, after I go through these, there are others that you can think of. Feel free to put them in the Q&A and I'd be more than happy to address those as well. So one is teachers can only do so much. So it's really important to not misconstrue what I mean by that. It's not to say that teachers are, have shortcomings in teaching or imparting EF skills or executive functioning skills. Like I mentioned earlier, it's really common, especially for those big projects that teachers give due dates for smaller tasks or subtasks that lead to the big task, the finished product. And that applies to or refers to some of the executive functioning skills that were mentioned in the previous slide, like planning, goal setting, and even self-monitoring and other things like that. However, if you have multiple students in one classroom, right, that means you have multiple bodies that represent where they're at with different executive functioning skills, right? And if one teacher is teaching multiple students and giving them the same guide, well, then what happens is that the teacher is not addressing the nuances that exist in every student. Again, that is not the fault of the teacher. It just means that we probably need to have another solution to addressing that, which would be one-on-one mentorship. Okay, and the next point here, the lack of awareness of executive functioning tools. Yeah, I would say it's pretty self-explanatory, right? Like you can't use what you don't know. So if a student isn't aware of the executive functioning skills and the tools that are available to execute them, so then, they're going to be limited in their execution of them. And then you have some students that are aware of executive functioning tools, but they lack awareness in using them effectively. So for example, a student may know how to add due dates or time blocks to do homework on their calendar, and it may give them the cue like, oh, this is homework time, and they're, able to self-regulate in that way, which is great. But they may not know that, like, for example, that you can make their phone automatically like stop notifications when that happens. That's actually something I recently started doing for my phone. I got a phone like a couple months ago, and I think I got like a suggestion, and I was like, oh, what's that? And I checked it out, and turns out, like, yeah, I can have like time blocks where I'm, when I'm teaching or having one-on-one mentorship, and during that time I have no notifications. I don't manually have to hit something, right? And the more efficient that we can in autopiloting the executive functioning process, I think, that can lead to really great outcomes. So students don't have to work harder, right? And then the next one, the last one, external motivation is needed to reinforce below average self-motivation. And this is kind of where the idea of almost like it takes a community to raise a child, right? We have the academic mentor, we have the parent, we have the teacher, and then we have the student. So all of us are like a multi-pronged front in order to ensure that the student, as much as we can, is able to complete tasks. So maybe they don't have an inner drive. It could be for a host of things, not necessarily at the fault of the student, right? We don't need to like unnecessarily demonize the student. Could be that they just, they're in a space where they just really don't know what the next step is, and as far as college is concerned or what have you. So there doesn't seem to be like an end goal or end point, which might impact motivation. So holding the student accountable and looking at the micro steps and the micro pictures, and not necessarily the big picture, can help the student. And then, of course, holding that student accountable in however way that might resonate with the student. A one-on-one mentor who is skilled in executive functioning can help find that for that student. So, but yeah, Kevin, what are your thoughts on this?
You said it all.
Oh. All right. Okay, so the last one. So how can executive functioning coaching promote academic success? I love this. So of course, as you can imagine, if we have, like we mentioned earlier, some deficiencies in executive functioning, you can imagine that can lead to a lack of school success. That can lead to a negative social, emotional, and behavioral impacts. And so, yeah, we want to know, how can we help? And so be a surrogate frontal lobe. So we talked about the function of the frontal lobe and how executive functioning got its name because of that frontal lobe. And so having a surrogate frontal lobe where the student doesn't have to bear the cognitive load of executive function, especially if they haven't quite developed that yet, is helpful to then, with time, what we would expect is that it does grow, right? And, as the student does grow in that, what I often seen in my experience is also just a better sense of self. I think that's an intuitive, almost inevitable outcome of this, which is great, because that also leads to better confidence. And with increased confidence includes, generally after that, independence, increased independence with executing these tasks, and even just, better self-esteem, all of those things, which makes sense that all of those things that we talked about earlier about social, emotional, behavioral impacts, with time, of course, and it depends on every student how much time that will take, those things tend to turn around as a result of that. And then teach skills explicitly. So we talked about executive functioning skills. So they are skills that can be taught, that can be learned, that can be refined, and can be perfected. They can also be adapted, right? So different situations may call for the same executive function may look different in one context versus the other. So for instance, if you're dealing with a student that's a musician, it could be, okay, we want to set aside, 15, 20 minutes every day to practice this piece or these measures. That's obviously going to look different than, say, a student that's studying for a Spanish test, or it could be the same student who happens to also be studying for a Spanish test, and how that's going to be broken down. But what the student we'll see, as a result of that one-on-one mentorship is that's, even though they're different contexts, right, that the end goal and the structure has some similarity in the sense that we're taking a task, we're setting aside time, we're eliminating distractions as much as possible, and we're trying to be realistic with our goals, among other things, right, to get us to that, that goal that they're trying to achieve. And so that third, relate skills to real life contexts. This is just that's like my mentorship, philosophy in general, right? Being able to relate it to the student, because what's the point of telling the student to do something if they can't relate to it, right? It's got to be personal. It's got to feel like, oh, this applies to me, because then there's more emotional investment. And if there's more emotional investment, there's a greater odds of wanting to try to achieve that goal, right? And then actively support working memory. Yes, so doing as much as we can to support working memory. So things like, I like to ask my students, so like, how was your weekend, or how was your week? What's going on? And part of the conversation sometimes is, how much sleep did you get? And that's because, well, the amount of sleep that you get can impact working memory. So if we are, if we have a student that's maybe not as clued into those things, or, if a student that's constantly tired, then it would make sense perhaps why their working memory isn't all there on a given day. So 5, provide repeated opportunities for guided practice. Yes, so definitely don't want to feel like we're always like penalizing the student, like, oh, you missed one, you're horrible, and your future is ruined. Like, we're not going to do that. But of course, we want to give the student chances and opportunities for guided practice. And that often comes in just, giving them little battles, right? It doesn't have to always be the big, the finale, the big project being done, but it's just the little steps. Oh, you showed up to session on time. Fantastic. Okay, so we were going to complete this task on this date. Okay, and then you're gonna text me afterwards that you've done it. And then I can't wait to get that text from you. And then I get the text, oh, I finished such and such task. I'm like, awesome job, Adam, you did great. Things like that, giving them the opportunities, and that, of course, will encourage them, lift their self-esteem. And as we talked about, how that leads to greater independence and confidence and all of that, like those are things that can help. 6, so develop and be accountable to routine. So kind of what I was talking about earlier. So again, as with many things, these steps can merge and work together. So accountability and praise, and modeling and encouraging human decency, again, with praise, and with also, things like empathy that we talked about. Not only we're trying to increase the students' confidence and success, but we also want them to be mindful of others, especially like when it comes to things like group projects or anything where they'll have to be dependent on other people, or even, respect to those who are in authority in their lives in the execution of these tasks, like teachers, even parents sometimes, not sometimes, we should always respect our parents, but you know what I mean? We want the people that are in the students' lives and that are contributing to the well-being and the success of the student, for the student to model that human decency. And what better models do they have than the authority figures in their lives? So yeah, so there are some ways that we can help. Any thoughts on that, Kevin?
Apologize if there's background noise, but I would like to stress number 7, because at the end of the day, although we're teaching skills and we're trying to break them down into manageable, actionable steps, we are not working with robots.
Yes.
Right? We're working with humans, and we're teaching humaning in some cases. And it's just kind of using the power of the mind, the power of these executive functioning skills. I used to always say, you've got a good mind, use it. You have a problem, you can solve it. We just have to sometimes communicate and talk and be honest with ourselves. So I stress heavily number 7.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That I agree. All right. So I appreciate your time today. I hope that, it's been illuminating, that you feel like we've walked away with some perspective. So it looks like we have some things in the chat here. So Jerry says, great points. These skills are probably more important for teachers and students. Teachers who assign projects, homework daily, / over weekends with teachers, underestimating time to complete project tasks, and lack of empathy for students' perspectives / time / extracurriculars, which creates extreme time constraints on students and stress. Yeah. It's definitely something that's not isolated to students, for sure. Yeah, and it's one of those challenges too that comes with the, the education, the state of education right now. Every student is varied, and I think also with each student, especially high school students, wanting to be as competitive as they can for college applications usually means taking on quite a bit of demanding extracurriculars, and also just to have a fulfillment outside of school. That's definitely something that, that is worth looking, into just on a macro level of, how can we best, how can we as educators, whether we're teaching inside of the classroom or, we're academic mentors with ESM, how can we get best meet the needs of the student in such a way that we're not unnecessarily overwhelming them? That's, that's something we definitely want to think about.
And modeling. I mean, a lot
Yeah.
of it's how we learn. So if they're not getting something, or if they're not, the students are struggling with modeling. That's what we mean
Yeah.
by being explicit. Sometimes we just say, well, just read it again, or just do it again. We don't actually sit down and say, well, what are you doing? How did you read this? How did you come up? What was your plan? What was your process? Talk me through your steps. What were you thinking? You can do that for the SAT. You can do that for any assignment. We do that for life. But when
Yeah.
we don't see it being done effectively, it's hard to mimic. And that's how we learn first. We can't pull something out of nothing.
Definitely. Absolutely. Very, very true. Yeah. And that, again, just going back to the point that like all these skills, especially like with empathy, like we can't just expect it from the student and not emulate it ourselves as educators, right? And being able to see like, okay, we take interest in your understanding of it, and we don't just show it, we show it, right? We show it in the way that we lay out the task. We show in the way that we give our lectures or our lessons. And when the student feels like, oh, like they actually care about my success, or oh, they actually care about that I understand it, then of course they're motivated. If it's clear that the educator, wherever that might be, is checked out, and they're just here to give you a bunch of worksheets and they don't really care how it impacts your life, like, yeah, it's totally understandable that a student would be checked out at that point. Yeah. Okay, and then we got an anonymous attendee. Oh, okay, we got a question. What do you suggest for students who may struggle with these issues, have the tools to succeed, but don't want to use them because they think they shouldn't have to, and keep trying to do it like everyone else? Example, a student who is time blind is given a timer to use to stay on track and see how fast time passes, but doesn't want to use it because they can do it, but then they struggle and get frustrated. That is a very good question. Do you want to start with that one, Kevin?
Of course, you throw that to me.
Yeah.
I will say, I have dealt with this a lot. And the one thing that is almost impossible to intervene on because it's motivation. You cannot make somebody do something they don't want to do. And anyone who thinks that you can, I said, well, tell me how your newborn and your 2-year-olds and your 5-year-olds and your 12-year-olds and your 15-year-olds work. Because if we could make them, we would, but we can't. So it's about relationships.
Yes.
Because people who trust you are more likely to follow your and suggestions and your recommendations. So if we don't have that, if we think that just because the name on the list says teacher and the student roster is there, that they're just supposed to automatically listen to us without us building that relationship and rapport, without having trust, which is our capital, then how can learning take place? How can they do things when they are challenging? Because this is the key. These things aren't hard to execute when there's no challenge. We're talking about when there is a challenge.
Yes.
Right? So what do I need when I'm being challenged? Support.
Yeah. Yes.
So if we support them, then maybe they'll be more likely to say, you know what? And they may not want it today, and they may not want it tomorrow, but keep asking on Wednesday. That's our routine. Sometimes takes 605 before they get it. And that's okay. Sometimes it takes 6.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good and so true. And, the light bulb moment, it's one of those things where, we can't always estimate. In fact, I would say we can't estimate when that light bulb moment will happen. Sometimes it takes weeks. Sometimes it takes months until the student realizes, oh, like this, oh, this academic mentor is in my corner, and they've been in my corner since day one, and they've shown genuine interest in me and my success, and it just clicks. And it could be an event. It could just be that they decided to get over that feeling like, they can do it like everyone else. I would also just model, like for me personally, what I found sometimes pretty effective is showing that like, I need these for me to function, right? I think sometimes students think like, oh, well, they're just telling me all these things to do because they just want my life to be hard. And like, of course, that's irrational and that's not true, right? But when they see like, oh, like I have to set alarms, I have to make sure all of my sessions are on a calendar, because without them I would be late to every session, which is not good for me, right? I need to put on alarms or have instances where my notifications are silent so I don't get distracted, right? And so once they see that and they see like, oh, okay, so she doesn't just quote unquote have it all together, because sometimes I think, especially when you're building relationships with these students and showing a high level of expertise, they tend to draw the conclusion, oh, you just have it all together, like you don't need, it's effortless, you don't have to do anything, like it just comes automatically. And so the student may feel like, okay, well, everyone else doesn't have to do that, so I'm not going to, and everyone else includes my mentor, right? But I think it's helpful for me to peel back the curtain and say, hey, like this is a system I have. Without this, I wouldn't function. Like even something as simple as me wearing this watch that tells me all this tasks I have to complete, that helps me function as an adult. And without them, like I literally would not be able to be a responsible adult. And so I think they may read that as like maybe you being humble, right? Which I think would be a great thing if they see it that way. And they're like, oh, wow, okay. So I can just do the thing that you do. And, they already have a great respect for you as someone who is, like I said, an academic mentor, or even a parent, like same thing, like, hey, like, I don't just go to work and come back and just do it automatically. Like there are things that I have to do to make me feel motivated that day. It's not every day I go to work that I feel motivated to go like, and yeah, and you just be vulnerable. Like the other day, XYZ happened, and, I had to think about ABC because, I didn't feel like it. But I was thinking of, I was thinking of you, and I was thinking of XYZ. I was thinking of, other things. And I knew, okay, well, even though I feel this way, this is what I need to do for the betterment of you guys, right? And I think just having those, again, and then that goes back to what Kevin said about relationships. That's how to foster those relationships. Now, it may not be that, after that heart to heart, that immediately there's a light switch and everything's great. Like, oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? Like that would just be perfect, right? And then, they live happily ever after, and, the student has changed their perspective, and on goes the story. But you are planting seeds. And if they see that over and over and over again, it's going to become apparent to them eventually. So yeah, it's an understandable place to be in, being a parent or any sort of authority figure in a student's life, especially if they're a teenager. It's hard, but eventually they'll get it. Eventually they will.
I agree. I would like to, when I was in special ed, more explicitly in the classroom and doing all of these things every day, I had a metaphor that helped me. And I said, I'm more of a gardener than I am like a teacher. And as a gardener, you have all different kinds of flowers and plants and trees, and you don't get to tell the rose to act like a daisy, to act like an oak tree. They are going to be what they're going to be. Our job is to just nurture the environment so that they can grow and become, and it's going to do it in their time. And as long as we kind of get off our own timetable, it gets easier to kind of manage.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. That's such a good point. Very, very good point. But yeah, any other thoughts or questions from the audience?
I wanted to drop those links into the chat so that people could have them. So I'm going to stop share and
All right.
I'll add that to that for now.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, in the meantime, yeah, we'll definitely move into.
And there's no other question. I guess I could ask a question. of anyone is there, what has been the thing that you found to be the easiest to help your students, the simplest? Because I know we always think in terms of challenges, but what is it that they can, if I did this, they get it? Has anyone kind of seen that or had that experience?
Yeah. So usually the first thing I'll ask them is if like they've done any sort of like planning for themselves, like whether it's like with homework or like how do they tell themselves that like they need to complete homework. And usually I'll get something along the lines of, oh, they write it in a planner or they, I don't know, put it on their phone or write it in their iPad or whatever. And then I ask them, well, do you like that? Do you like doing it that way? And I get varied answers. And I think some of them, I would say a number of them actually pause and they're like, no one's ever asked me if I like it. I'm like, yeah, because like, you know, the method of planning that you choose to regulate yourself, you should actually enjoy it, right? And then some people realize like, and some people might realize that, you know, they've just been told to write it in a planner because that's what they've always been told to do. Now, of course, you know, with phones in schools, you know, wouldn't want to um, step on toes on that. But there are some students that like, I like teach them like, hey, you can actually speak into your phone, right? Your assignment. And because, you know, typically we speak faster than we type and write, and that can do it. And some students have done that and just be like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know I could do that. And so like the first thing, going back to your question, so the first thing I would do is just like, or sometimes I would do if it's just a matter of like just being able to write down what they have to do for the day, something that might be seemingly as basic as that, is to just check in with me like the next day, and in the evening tell me if they've written down their assignment, right? Just super basic, super not a huge thing, but once they've done that and they're like, hey, yeah, I've done it, usually most of the time it's done. Again, I would say that not every student has that issue, but if it's like we're struggling so much with executive functioning that the student can't write down their assignments and they always forget their homework, I do that, and then, you know, I take an opportunity to praise, like, awesome, like, great job, I'm so proud of you. And then, you know, the next time we meet, we then build from there. It's like, okay, so how can we make this system a consistent one, and get them to think, right? Get them to feel like they're part of the process and they're not just being lectured at. I think that's another important thing. So I found that to be a positive experience in my experience working with students that need those executive functioning skills developed. Yeah. Oh,
I saw the third question and I was actually, I'm dropping a link into that
yeah.
answer and into the chat. Because
Mm,
yes, any thoughts on that? There is plenty of information now, much more than there was in 2006, which is why I always come back to this idea of there are no soft skills, because they used to refer to them as soft skills and people then put it on the back burner. When we have this conversation, it's about how do I accomplish these things? How do I be successful? And when you can change it to that tack, is we're going to develop goals. We're going to work for the long term. It becomes different. And they have more information now geared towards high schoolers and even young children. So lifeskillsadvocate.com is a completely evidence-based test that's perfectly free. Anybody can do it anywhere. You just create an account and they give you the results, and it starts that conversation on, here are some examples of executive functioning skills. What do you find to be your strengths? What do you find to be your, I don't call them needs or challenges, I call them priorities, because you can't be bad at something you weren't taught. So these are our priorities, and we're going to just talk about them. Okay, well, how did you incorporate this in your week today, in your day today, that kind of thing. So there is plenty of literature out there nowadays that's geared towards them, and how we can have that conversation with teenagers and other people who are considered either neurodivergent or just regular, and we just stuck them because it happens.
Facts. Oh yeah, that's good. I'm honestly like, one thing I really like about just living in the day and age is just how much information there is on like anything, right? Like it's just so much literature now. And you know, and I'm glad that you're able to link that there, so parents and others can be a little bit more empowered and also informed on how to, like, the direction they should take with their children. All right, here's another one. What do you suggest for students? Oh, that's a different one. I thought there was another one. Never mind. I think it just moved to the answered pile. Okay. Fabulous. Any other thoughts or questions? I guess I have a question for you, Kevin. What would you say is the biggest challenge that you've had when, mentoring an executive functioning student that like was overcome by that? Like that you were able to, it was the biggest challenge, but you were able to be successful in assisting that student.
So I've had a number of students, and like I'm going to use your example, going back to college applications, because college applications requires a whole lot of off script work. Like you have to really manage your time. That's also if you're trying to do test prep and college apps and the first half of your senior year, it's going to throw you for a loop. But it requires usually the time. Like if you haven't put the time in already to develop that relationship and that routine, they may or may not still work with you. So I've always found it better and more effective to have already had that relationship from junior or sophomore year. With those students, even though they were struggling to meet deadlines and that kind of thing, communicate, would show up to the office, or they would answer my emails so we could still accomplish the goals. Does everything get done perfectly? No, but they're all in college. They all got scholarships. And that's what matters to me, because it's not about getting in. Anybody can get in college. It's college for everybody. Not everybody gets out of college. If you want to look at the success numbers, don't look at their admissions rates, look at their graduation rates after 4 years. Who's doing that? How are they? Because that tells you if they're supporting their students or not. Quiet as it's kept. Colleges know that they've been dealing with teenagers, and teenagers are not known for being wise. They're not known for being pretty, on top of things. That's not what they're known for. So they have services at almost every single school to support them. And if they're not supporting them, you see lower graduation rates. So we find schools that are better fit, even when it's big, small, that kind of thing. So I would say it's really just being consistent and putting in that long term. Like I still keep in touch with them when they're in college. Keep calling them, writing this paper, because having that allows them to also see that they can access other resources.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's so good. And even something that's seemingly simple as self-advocacy, right? Like you were mentioning is like saying, hey, I need help. And like, it's okay to ask for help. One phrase that I heard from my microbiology professor when I was in college that I still like refer to this day, even in my sessions, is like, life is messy, right? Life is messy. And so because of that, I don't expect that every single executive functioning goal that we set for ourselves, that you will accomplish every single one and you will never miss a deadline, and that you will always have everything written down and like all the time, 100% of the time. We're first of all, like, I'm not like that. So that's not how I would now tell my students that that's the way that I expect from them. Now, of course, I expect that hopefully they would have the desire to put in their best in the same way that I desire to put in my best. But because of that open line of communication and also fostering a sense of, like I said, vulnerability, almost peeling back the layers of like, hey, this is how I function in my life. I think there's a greater sense of, oh, like you said, we're not dealing with robots, we're dealing with humans, and humans will human. I like using human as a verb. It makes me happy. But yeah, like humans will human. And so as a result of that, like I wouldn't want in my mentorship to give the student the idea that like, oh, if you have missed this deadline, you're an absolute failure of a student and there's no moving on from this. No, we take it as a lesson learned. What are ways that we can, move on from this? What are things that we could have maybe have done differently? And instead of looking at it as being fixated on it, we're like, okay, we're going to take these lessons, we're going to move that forward to the next task, right? And seeing life that way. And I think that would also be, because it is a lower moment for them too, that would be a place where, whether we're a teacher, a parent, or an academic mentor, to be like, hey, like, I was in a similar situation like this before. It didn't feel great in the moment, but then this happened and everything ended up working out. And so teenagers are in an interesting time in their lives, especially the teenagers we have now, having experienced COVID and the ramifications of that. It's not a small thing. And then just with the pressure of, all these, boxes they have to check and all of these things that they have to do, especially those who are college bound and then wanting to achieve that. And then like the application, it's a lot. It's a hard time. And I think having a level of humanity with them, especially during those low moments, is what can help propel them forward. But I would definitely agree with you that in my experience too, it's been those longer term students. Usually if it's for a little short bit of time, you don't really get to see their full evolution. But yeah, when you realize, oh, this student is taking 4 AP classes, and then they've got to do like an SAT at some point, and having to regroup and reassess, adapt the plan and all of that. And then seeing that in real time with the student of like, okay, so we have this going on, we've got a future goal, here's some possible obstacles. Okay, so what can we do to minimize the odds of those obstacles really making an impact in our plan, things like that. And again, making this a collaborative experience, not one where you're just dictating the student, you're going to do this, then you're going to do that, and then you're going to do this. Any questions? Okay, great, move on. Like, I can imagine myself as a teenager, I wouldn't be receptive. So I also look at it as, to be the mentor that I wish I had, So
That's exactly how I feel too. And it's like I'm trying to do for them, what not just what I didn't have, but also what I had. I had some great coaches and great teachers. And I know a lot of us can look back and think, it may not have been in a classroom, may not have been in an actual learning setting or a formal one, but there are people showing us how to handle things, how to get things done all the time, how to, call movers or shakers or hustlers, or whatever you want to call it. There are people who are good models, and we can draw on that. We, as coaches, as mentors, I'm grateful. So a lot of it I do out of a spirit of gratitude, and it becomes something different because you're also doing something for others that was done for you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. That's true. I think in my experience, I did a lot of self-teaching. But you're right. Like even my professor that said life is messy, like that was one moment, right? Where even though it was a learning environment, I think I don't even remember the context in which she said it. It may have had nothing to do with the class, but that stuck with me till this day. Right. So yeah, you do make a very, very good point there. There's a lot to pull from in unexpected places and places that don't necessarily relate to like academic learning. So yeah, very, very good point. Yeah, awesome. So it looks like we've got all the questions answered. Any final thoughts, Kevin, or?
No, I think we've covered a lot. And I'd like to hopefully people will have, if they have questions, they'll see the links in the chat, or we can just ask questions, go online. The information is now out there. It's not being hidden.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad we live in the age of information. Like literally the solutions are pretty much at our fingertips at this point. And it's all thanks to those who have been doing the work to document, right? Instead of just let things happen in passing, but to actually document results, see, results-based methods and strategies and things to help our students out as much as we can, because yeah, they definitely need that support. Well, Kevin, this was a pleasure. This was an absolute pleasure. And thank you all also, those who attended and are still here. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, so it says this was really great. Thank you, FYI.
Thank you. You're welcome, Heather.
Yes, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much, Heather, for joining, and everyone else who joined as well. Thank you so much. I hope you found it beneficial, and I hope you have a wonderful day today.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Bye-bye.